Okay. Hopefully that's enough time to get everybody in their seats and ready. And I just want to remind everybody on Zoom, if you could mute your video and your audio, that'd be great. That way we make sure all is well, get a good clean recording. But without much further ado, we'll have Jim Kaiser, Dr. Jim Kaiser up here to introduce Dr. Karen Steelman. Yeah, I got a hold two mic.
It's a handy thing.
I know.
Good thing I have big hands, Julia. Okay. Yes, thank you, Julia. Welcome, everyone, and all you folks in Zoom land to the February meeting of the Oregon Archaeological Society. Tonight, we are pleased to have with us to speak on Zoom Dr. Karen Steelman from Shumla Archaeological Research Center, Research and Education Center. Karen's an old buddy of mine, and so I'm pleased to be able to introduce her. She is a chemist and an archaeologist. She is currently director of the science group at Shumla, and she's sort of a boss of a group that integrates science, chemistry, and dating in with a bunch of folks who also study the archaeology and the rock art, specifically the rock art, to read the most ancient books in the Southwest. And these are giant mural paintings. Her colleague, Carolyn Boyd, determined this after long study, that these paintings that go back 4,000 or 5,000 years are giant murals painted all over these walls of rock shelters. And so she got Karen to come down from her job in Central Arkansas University, where she was a professor of chemistry, and take over this job at Shumla. Karen got a BA from some college in Texas. I don't remember where it was. Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas, and a PhD from Texas A&M. And she worked there with Marvin Rowe, and Marvin is an expert. He's the guy who really started the idea of being able to date pictographs in North America. And I remember sitting in the front row in my first paper where Marvin talked about dating pictographs, and he put up all this fancy science stuff, which goes way over my head. And he figured out that it was deer bone marrow they used as the binder, and that the painting was 2,800 years old or some such. And I was just, like, good grief. They can figure all that stuff out from a teeny weeny little chip that was going to fall off the rock wall anyway. So Karen studied with Marvin and was one of his best students, and has published extensively with Marvin, and now is sort of heading this up. She's sort of taken over the leadership of this from Marvin. She uses chemistry to both identify the pigments and then to date the organic binders that are used to attach, to fix the pigments onto the rock. And tonight she's going to talk to us with a presentation called Radiocarbon Dating Pictographs, Field and Laboratory Research. Take it away, Karen.
Hi, everyone. Everyone's having a good evening. Thank you for having me speak. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hello. As Jim said, I'm the science director at Shumla Archaeological Research and Education Center. We're a nonprofit that focuses on preserving and studying the rock art of a specific region in Texas called the Lower Pecos Canyonlands. And we do this through our mission statement with sort of focusing on documentation, research, stewardship, and education. So also, thank you for the introduction, Jim. As he said, I actually am a chemist, an archaeological chemist. And what that means is I use analytical chemistry to help answer archaeological questions. And most of my research career is focused on the chemical analysis of rock paintings or pictographs. And tonight, I'm going to talk about advances that we've been making in radiocarbon dating pictographs. And I'll explain how our team conducts both the field portion of that research as well as the laboratory work that we do. So let's see. I don't think this is going. There it goes. So this image here on my title slide is from Halo Shelter, and we'll get to see that figure again as we go through this. If you're not familiar with this region in Texas, the Lower Pecos Canyonlands is located at the confluence of the Devils and the Pecos Rivers with the Rio Grande. And it has these beautiful canyons throughout the area. And this area is the ancestral home of many indigenous peoples. It includes groups whose names have been lost to time, colonization, displacement, migration, and settlement. And we acknowledge the ancestral peoples who created this painted landscape with the vibrant living cultures of the Colhuatecans, the Apache, the Kiowa, the Tonkawa, the Comanche, and the Kickapoo. And at Shumla, we really strive to honor both past and living indigenous people and their cultural heritage with our research. Okay, so if you're not familiar with where we are, this is where I'm located. I actually live in a very small town so that I can be close to the rock art sites. So I live in a little town called Comstock, Texas. It's got about 200 people. And as I said, we are right on the US-Mexico border. And we have these sort of three rivers that come together in this area. We know of approximately 350 rock art sites on the US side of the border, just in Valverde County alone. And then Dr. Sylvain Turpin wrote a book about this style of rock art in Mexico, and she identified 35 known sites in Mexico, but presumably there are many more that we're not aware of. And this is some of the most sort of compositionally intricate prehistoric rock art in the world in this area. There are these dramatic canyons, and we have these rock shelters that are found within the canyons. Some of these shelters are enormous, such as the ones that you see here. For scale, you can kind of see the people at the bottom along the fence line. And I will say that that is a pretty good climb there. I've done it with a couple gallons of water in my backpack because we were cleaning rocks. So if you're not familiar with the Pecos River style rock art, some of these shelters are quite large, as I showed you in the picture before, and some of the panels span fairly long distances. The Rattlesnake Canyon, the mural is about 32 meters wide. The White Shaman site, which is one of the more known sites in the region, is actually one of the smaller ones at about 8 meters. But it's very densely painted. Just wanting to get you familiar with some of this imagery. This is Panther Cave. That's in Seminole Canyon State Park. And this picture here, I love the vibrant colors. This is at Rattlesnake Canyon. It's just a small portion of that 32-meter panel that I showed you. Here you can see two anthropomorphs that are facing each other, and they have splatter paint coming out of their mouths, and it's actually crisscrossing. And this has been hypothesized to represent sound or soul. The researchers here call it speech breath. And this is an amazing panel that we're actually going to get to go back to this year and do some additional work. We're really excited about that because I worry about this site, because this site is one of the sites that's most likely to be impacted by flash flood events in this area. When we've had flash flood events in this area, there has been water actually sitting on the bottom portion of this panel. Here's just a better photo of the White Shaman site, so you can see how densely painted. It's 8 meters wide. This mural's been interpreted as depicting creation mythology, and it's based on iconographic parallels with archaic core imagery seen in Mesoamerica, with groups such as the Nahua or the ancient Aztec and the modern Huichol. The Lower Pecos has these spectacular murals, but there is also a lot of good dirt archaeology in this region. This is Eagle Cave, and you can see all of that burned rock that is from earth oven cooking that's inside the shelter. And then we also have remarkable preservation of organic artifacts within these shelters, such as sandals and woven matting. There's a basket shown in this photo. Because these shelters are they don't get wet, so we have excellent preservation of organics. So we have some of the best preserved and longest records of hunting and gathering lifeways. From at Eagle Cave, the oldest dates are 13,000 years ago, and the area has, you know, continual occupation until up until European contact. So when we're recording these rock art sites, Shumla kind of breaks down what we do into different levels of rock art recording. And when I first came to Shumla about 8 years ago, we started a new project where we went and visited as many sites as we could and did this sort of level 1 documentation. So we kind of updated the state archaeology forms. We have our own rock art site form. Something really important that we put into that rock art site form was an iconographic inventory. So certain kinds of headdresses, certain kinds of paraphernalia, things that we see repeated patterns in the rock art. So we have that in our database. So for example, if I wanted to pull up every site that I know has feline imagery, I can do that. And so that's really useful for future research. But the main thing that we did as part of this initial level 1 documentation was photogrammetry. So we create 3D models, digital 3D models of the sites, and we do high resolution stitch photos that we call called gigapanoramas. And this is data that we are still using today to help us do more in-depth study. So a gigapan is just hundreds and hundreds of photos stitched together. This is Sunburst Shelter. And you know, as you zoom in, because it can be even thousands of photos stitched together. As you zoom in, you don't lose any detail. So we can see this wrist adornment on this anthropomorph, and we can see the individual brush strokes. So our team can have these on their computers, and they can study the site at their desk as much as they possibly can. There's nothing that beats going in the field, but they can get a lot of work done in the office. We do use these initial gigapans kind of as panel maps for the whole site when we're doing more in-depth work. We do also create 3D models of sites, and for all the sites that are on public property or if they're on ranches where the landowners have allowed it to do that. These are all online, so people can go in and see these. So after we had done this for over 235 sites in the area, and that took us about 4 years, we started wanting to have more detailed documentation of sites, which is something that Shumla had done in the past. Shumla's actually been around for 25 years. But we had kind of done sort of this level 1 documentation for many years. And so we wanted to get back into in-depth documentation. And so we wrote a couple grants to the National Science Foundation and to the National Endowment for the Humanities to fund a radiocarbon study for the region. This was really a 3-prong approach. The archaeological science and the radiocarbon dating were important, but it's even more important to have that in sort of collaboration with detailed art analysis as well as indigenous knowledge. And so it's really this interdisciplinary method of research that is the way forward. The archaeological science is better because of the knowledge of the archaeologists, and the archaeology is better because of the physical sciences. So we focused on about 10 sites in the region. We kind of picked those geographically along different rivers with just making sure we had a wide distribution. We also looked at that iconographic list that we had and focused on certain kinds of headdresses and certain kinds of figures so that we could really start to understand Pecos River style painting. So we wanted to do more in-depth documentation. There are hundreds and hundreds of figures at these sites. And if we picked one site to study, and we did this level of in-depth documentation, it might take us 3 or 4 years to do one site. And so we had to be selective. And so what we did is we picked these 10 sites and we focused on the figures that we were going to radiocarbon date, so that those figures, we had excellent photography. We illustrated them. We actually do microscopy, which I'll talk about some more, so that we document before we do any radiocarbon dating. It's really important that any radiocarbon dating project is embedded in that robust documentation program. And so our research design involved selecting central figures at these sites with identifiable attributes that are repeated across the landscape. So we conducted a formal art analysis. We documented, described, photographed, illustrated these central figures. So I'm going to come back to this figure that was on my title slide from a halo shelter. And you can see the D-stretch here. So this is an enhanced photograph. You have this, let's see if I can get the laser pointer to go. Sometimes it gets a little hung up. So we have the central figure here. And it's got a red in the middle of the body, and then it has a white sort of negative space, and there's a black line, and then a dashed line on the side of the body. On the other side of the body, there's like a hatched line, and then there are these what we call single pole ladder shapes forming the other side of the body. You have these beautiful wrist adornments. Here you have a black one on the figure's right hand, and then a red one on the figure's left hand. In the right hand, the figure is holding an addle or a spear thrower with finger loops. And the addle is loaded with a dart that has fletching. And then at the end, there is a stylized tip with that sort of red single pole ladder shape at the end. Then in the other hand, we have extra darts with fletching, and then a very fancy staff with more of those single pole ladder shapes. And then we have two lines coming off with a sort of ovoid bulb shape at the end that has sort of lines radiating off of it. We see this shape over and over again. We have a name for it just so that we have a name for this shape with these two lines and then this ovoid shape, and we call it a power bundle. We don't really mean any interpretive thing when we say that. It's just like when you say a circle is a circle. So this is a power bundle. And then most importantly, this figure has a deer antler headdress with red deer antlers and then black dots on the end of the tines. And so I'm kind of pointing out all of this. For one, it's just a beautiful sight and a beautiful pictograph. But it's these kinds of attributes and patterns that we're looking at as we radiocarbon date things. We don't want to just know how old the rock art is. We want to know how old are deer antlered figures. And are they the same, you know, is that a certain thing? And when they change to a different headdress, is that a chronology thing, or is that a geographical thing that is happening? So we're looking at details that we can learn from dating these figures. So here's a detail of this figure here. And I guess I'm going to give the punchline away already. And if anybody has read my collaborator, Carolyn Boyd's research, you may already suspect this because she's seen this at the White Shaman site. But what we did with this study is we went to these 10 other sites to see if we could see the same kind of pattern. And it turns out these black dots are painted first, and then the antlers are connected. And so it's really interesting. We're trying to understand the order that the paint was applied to the wall and to see how the artist constructed the mural. So that's quite sort of remarkable that the black dots are painted first. And then I'm going to show you this beautiful illustration done by Carolyn Boyd of the site. And then the figure we were looking at is right here. So we have this figure here that we were just looking at. But you can see that there are lots and lots of other figures at this site. So as part of our fieldwork, we did conduct digital microscopy across the entire panel at that site, and I will explain what that means. And we also obtained 13 radiocarbon dates for pictographs at Halo Shelter. So here's Deanna climbing down to the site, and then you can see all the team is really busy at work. So Tim is doing photographs. Ashley is sitting down, holding the ladder down, but she's also writing down photo numbers and taking down notes. And it looks like Deanna and Audrey are having a talk about something on their cell phone, but what they're doing is they're de-stretching the panel so that enhancement, we can take photos. If you're familiar with seeing that with other rock art studies, there's an app that you can put on your phone. You take a photo and you can do the enhancement while you're in the field. And so Deanna actually has a handheld microscope in her hand, and her and Audrey are deciding where to place that microscope so that they can see the paint stratigraphy. And so here's sort of another image of that process. And so we look at where there is paint overlapping and figures. So we have red and black. And everybody look at the picture at the bottom right. That's what we get from the handheld microscope. And you can see, I think, pretty clearly that the red is painted over the black in this instance. So we do that at hundreds and hundreds of locations across the panel. We take a rough illustration of the panel with us as our map, and we write down all of our notes. We also have like a checklist that we do. And we're getting hundreds of those microscopy photos across the whole panel. So here I've got a simple example. I have 3 figures that are polychromatic. And you can see that we have color within a figure. So here we can see, what we did is we took all of those photos, and then we had 3 people look at those microscope photos, the microphotographs, and say, okay, I think it's the red over the black. So all 3 people have to agree for us to say, yes, it's red over black. So here we have A001, the red of A001 is over the black of A01. So that's color within a single figure. But you also have between figures. So here we have the red of A001, anthropomorph number 1, over the black of anthropomorph number 2. And so we're looking also at the color overlap between different figures. And we put that all into this flow chart. This is a computer program called Harris Matrix Composer. Archaeologists that use really complex excavation units to study dirt archaeology actually use this kind of program for that. A Harris Matrix was originally developed to study profile stratigraphy, but we're using it to study paint stratigraphy on the wall. And so what's remarkable is that over and over at every site, we're seeing that the black was painted first, and then the red, and then the yellow. And we have seen this for Carolyn has done this extensively at the White Shaman site. And then the team has done this at these 10 new sites that we did as part of this study. And what is remarkable is that they all follow that same pattern. And so that means that these figures are not, or the murals are not painted by figure, but they're painted by color. And that's really fascinating. But we also use this to help us select the best samples for radiocarbon dating. So we would select in our flowchart, now this one's really simple, but we would have ones with hundreds of these, that we would select things that are sort of in the middle, and then we would select things from that top layer, and we would select something to radiocarbon date from the bottom layer, so that we could see what was going to happen if the mural was painted over hundreds of years. We would get different ages for those different paintings. But if they were all painted at the same time, which we suspected, then we would get statistically indistinguishable ages for all of the places that we sample. So the other part of this project that I'm not going to talk about, but I did want to mention, is that once we have all of this data, Carolyn took this research to Mexico to talk to indigenous groups there in Mexico and get their feedback. And she mainly went and visited the Huichol, and that's more of the interpretive part of this research. And so they have been doing that. We're really learning a lot from that indigenous knowledge, which is just fantastic. So this is supposed to be about radiocarbon dating, so let's focus on that. We do have to take a very small sample from the shelter. It's the only thing that we do that's destructive. Everything else we're doing is a non-destructive technique. But these samples are quite small, and we use aluminum foil and sterile scalpel blades just to kind of show you sort of an idea of size. The photo on the left is sort of a before sample collection, and then the one on the right is after. So samples are usually about a larger sample would be about 2 square centimeters. So these are quite small pieces, and we are taking from locations that are already exfoliating from the shelter wall and will be lost naturally due to weathering. Something else that we do that's really important is that we take samples of unpainted rock as control samples. It's really important to have that paint sample. That's what you're going to radiocarbon date, but you need to process a sample of unpainted rock as a control, because you want to make sure that there's no contamination in the rock itself. You want to make sure that the organic material that you're pulling out of the paint sample and radiocarbon dating is from the paint and is going to tell you when that pictograph was painted, and not when bacteria lived on the rock, thousands of years ago or something like that. So we always take these control samples. So to think about what is in a paint sample, this is a cross section with a flake turned on its side, and we're dating the organic material. That we're doing radiocarbon dating, so we have to have organic material. But the majority of pictographs around the world are created using inorganic mineral pigments. Red and yellow paintings are typically composed of iron oxide, hydroxide, ochres. And many of the black paintings around the world are made not with charcoal pigment, but with manganese pigment. So that pigment that provides the color is not going to be something that you can radiocarbon date. It's also, your paint sample is embedded in this rock matrix of, here I'm often dealing with sites that are on limestone, so carbonates and oxalate minerals. But this is also the same if you have something on sandstone or granite. But it's that organic binders and vehicles, the animal fat, the plant extracts, the things that were used to mix and make a fluid paint that we are going to radiocarbon date. So we have actually two methods of doing radiocarbon dating. One is focusing on that organic material, the organics, in that paint layer. So in this black paint layer here, we have a way of extracting that organic material. But we have a second method where we can actually date the mineral accretions that are coating the pictograph. So here in this cross section, a lot of times people talk about pictographs looking faded, but a ochre, a mineral pigment doesn't fade. It's not an organic dye. It's going to stay that vibrant color. But the reason that the pictographs look faded is because you're having to look through this micron thick mineral accretion that is coating the top of the paint layer. So also that accretion is often found underneath the paint layer. So we can actually often get minimum and maximum ages for painting. So I call this the Oreo cookie effect. The paint layer with the organics is the cream, and then we have the oxalate accretions, which are the two chocolate sandwiches. So this is a great thing that we can do because it gives us more confidence in our results. It's kind of like going to the doctor and getting a second opinion. You've got two dates that are telling you the same thing. So how do we do that? How do we pull that organic material out of that paint layer? So for that first method of dating the paint, dating that organic binders and vehicles in the paint, we use something called plasma oxidation. As Jim was saying, this was developed by my PhD advisor, Marvin Rowe. And we've worked on this technique and improved it in the way that we are more efficient. We have this system in my lab that now I can process 10 paint samples in the time it used to take me to process one sample. So each of those glowing tubes would have a paint sample in it. And we're using electricity to react the organic material in the paint sample and turn it into carbon dioxide. It's called plasma oxidation. And the plasma means ionized gas. And so a neon sign, for example, is a plasma, or like maybe you've heard of like a plasma welding torch. And so here we have these copper electrodes on either side of each of those chambers, and we're running electricity through this tube that's been evacuated, but it has just a little bit of oxygen in there, and the paint sample's there, and it reacts only with the organic material in the paint sample, and it turns that to carbon dioxide, and that gets frozen in these glass tubes here because they're immersed in liquid nitrogen. And so we're freezing that product carbon dioxide. So your paint sample's up here, you turn on the electricity with the oxygen and it makes it excited and turns it into carbon dioxide, and then it gets frozen down in this tube here in the bottom. And then we use a blowtorch to seal off that glass tube. So then I have this glass tube that can has my carbon in it from the paint. And so then that gets sent to an accelerator mass spectrometry laboratory. I collaborate with Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory outside of San Francisco, and they do the isotope measurement to determine age. So we get this ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-13. So let's talk about some results. So here are, we took 14 samples. One of the samples did not have enough carbon in it for us to get a date, but all the other 13 did. And so you can see that all of these line up. They're statistically indistinguishable. And that matches what we saw with the microscopy data, because the figures were all sort of interwoven with each other from the paint stratigraphy. And so we knew that it was a single composition. And so since we know it's a single composition, these are not 13 separate radiocarbon dates. Think about it if you're dating, I don't know, you're wanting to date the Last Supper painting, and you've got, you know, all 12 apostles. Well, if you took, and you've got the table, and you have the stuff on the table, and you've got Jesus, and you got all the people. If you took paint from each of those different figures, you would say, well, that's the same painting. And so you could say, hey, I can average those because they're all supposed to give me the same result. That's what we're doing here. These are not 13 separate figures on the pictograph panel. They're 13 parts of the same painting. And so if we do a weighted average, we determine that Halo Shelter was painted, so the radiocarbon, the weighted average is this 2004 plus or minus 12. And then if we calibrate that against the radiocarbon calibration curve, we get this age range of 45 BC to 65 AD. So we know that Halo Shelter was painted sometime between 45 BC and 65 AD. And so we get a pretty narrow range because we're able to average all of those dates from the one site. Now, I was talking about how we had the second method of dating the sandwich, dating the chocolate cookies on the Oreo sandwich. So dating these oxalate mineral accretions that are above and below the paint layer. We're dating a specific mineral. We're dating something called oxalate. Calcium oxalate is C2O4. And so we're dating the carbon that is in that oxalate accretion. And this is just a infrared spectrum here telling me that that oxalate is present in the accretion. I have to know that it's there before I can radiocarbon date it. And we do a lot of processing of that oxalate to kind of clean it up and isolate it before we radiocarbon date it. But we can get those radiocarbon ages. So let me show you some data of that. So this is Jackrabbit Shelter that's along the Pecos River. And I've turned my graph sideways just so it fits better on my slide. But these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 radiocarbon dates on the paint itself. And from 5 different paintings. And we also know from the microscopy data at Jackrabbit that it is also a composition. And so the red line is the weighted average of those paint dates. But to see if I trust those dates, I also did oxalate dating, where we dated the mineral accretion above and below each painting. And so for like sample 1, you've got the paint date in the middle, and then you have above the line and below the line, the 2 Oreo, the chocolate cookies. You have the oxalate accretion above and the oxalate accretion underneath. And because that paint date is in the middle of those two, I'm pretty sure that that is the correct age. And so I feel pretty confident that the age of Jackrabbit Shelter is about 2800 to 2630 BC. And so you can see that we did this for all of the different paint samples across. Here's some data from Jaguar Shelter. I'm just showing you this because it is the oldest site that we know of in the Lower Pecos, about 3630 to 3370 BC. So this is the oldest age we have. So while I'm doing all of this chemistry stuff in the lab, our archaeology team is documenting everything that we're doing. And one of the ways that we do this is we use Adobe Photoshop, and they use these Cintiqs for graphic artists, where they are illustrating the figures that we're dating and the figures that we're studying to create a graphic database of what we've done on the panel, and also to better understand the figures that we're studying. And so here is an illustration of one of the figures from Jaguar Shelter. And then the green dots are all of the locations on that figure that we did microscopy data. And then the yellow dots are where the radiocarbon samples came from. And then we have all of the associated figures that are in superimposition with that figure. So this is all done in different layers in Photoshop. It's a lot of work that really Diana Rodillo-Rolón and David Keim, our current archaeologists, are doing a lot of work with. Here's that illustration without the rock background. And you can see sort of on the right side all of their different layers. Each color of each figure is a separate layer, so they can actually animate this if they wanted to. And then they add notes of things that they're not quite sure about, or things that they for future work, so that we can keep all of this data into this graphic database. So let's see, I know that I'm pretty close to time. Let me see what I wanted to show you here. Eagle Cave is another cool site. It has had excavations. There's all that burned rock from earth ovens. But I'd like to show you just some pretty pictures here at the end. This is a map of that gigapan that's been enhanced for Eagle Cave. And all of those circles are things that the team notices at their computers before we go into the field. And they're looking for areas where there's paint that's overlapping, where we need to do that microscopy. And so then we do that microscopy using those maps that they've created. And then we have all of these photographs. 3 people evaluate these to see which color is on top, and if everyone agrees. They've also marked those as final locations, and then that goes into the flow chart. And so we see again that all of the black is on the bottom, the red, and then the yellow. It's a pretty cool site, Eagle Cave. This figure has actually 2 rabbit ears, one black one outlined in red, and then a white one outlined in yellow. or maybe it's yellow. No, it's yellow outlined in white. And then there is this dots coming out of the mouth of the figure, the speech breath. Here's one of the illustrations. So this is, we can take that information from that graphic database and then we can make illustrations for showing this. And here's some more of these beautiful illustrations. This site is actually not in great condition, but the team is really able to pull a lot of information out. So here's these. And then I just, these are some of the radiocarbon dates from Eagle Cave. The blue are the direct paint dates. The green are the underneath oxalate dates. And then that sort of orange color are the over oxalate dates. And so because the under oxalate dates and the over oxalate dates are bracketing those direct dates, we trust those even more than we might. And so we know Eagle Cave is this sort of 3290 plus or minus 50 radiocarbon years before present. And we calibrate that to the Gregorian calendar, and it's not been rounded here, but so sort of 1687 or 1690 to about 1450 BC. And so that tells us the age of Eagle Cave. Here are all of the dates that we have for the Lower Pecos. And what is astounding is that this one single style of art persists for 4,000 years. We have dates that are younger and we have dates that are older, and there's basically continual production for 4,000 years, which is mind-blowing. I'd like to thank my collaborators, Dr. Deanna Rodillo-Rolón, as well as Dr. Phil Daring and Dr. Carolyn Boyd, our PIs on the project. And David Keim, who does a lot of the illustrations, is there on the left. Rudy Banney was an intern and then worked with us for a little over a year. He's now in Chicago. We miss him, but he did a lot of the radiocarbon lab work. And thank you for your attention.
Wow. That is awesome. All right. I bet you, Jim, that you wish you had some of those tools for your rock art research. All right, we'll go ahead and start our Q&A over here in OMSI. And I see one question here, Harvey.
Question of how you taking those sample? You're taking a sample for the paint for the spectrograph. Are you just taking a tiny piece, or can you use a laser to vaporize it and then take a spectrogram of it? How's that work? And also, what kind of software you're using to stitch your photographs together?
So for the radiocarbon dating, we are so I'm taking little small paint flakes. I'm usually taking from areas that are already exfoliating from the wall, that are loose. And so I'm just barely touching those with a scalpel blade just to kind of pop off something that's already loose. I do, so most of the time they're, smaller than a dime, usually about half the size of a dime. We do micro excavate those under a microscope to get the accretion layer separate from the paint layer and then the underneath layer. So that takes a lot of like a steady hand and a lot of patience to do that micro excavation. The question about stitching the photos. So it's hard. So I showed two kinds of technology where we stitch photos together. The GigaPan is a robotic gimbal system that you put on a tripod, and it takes overlapping photos from a single point. And so you end up getting distortion on the edges, but you get better overlap. So usually those are more higher resolution. That was a company that had their own software called Giga Auto Panorama, I believe is what the software was called. but GoPro bought the company to kill the company. And so we're to like use old operating systems to use this older software because we haven't found a replacement of that we're happy with. For the 3D models, we're using Agisoft PhotoScan, I believe it is. I don't do those things. Our team does those, our archaeologists do, but those are the softwares that we're using.
Did I see a question here? I saw a question on Zoom asking if you got any interest from the tribes for your rock art research. Are there any tribes that are interested in or connected to your rock art work?
So we work with private landowners as well as state and federal agencies, and so we do consultation, especially when we're doing work on federal property. The Amistad National Recreation Area is here. We do get interest. We, write letters and they ask for updates. And so we do that. There are 5 associated tribes in this area that are recognized. Most of those are plains groups, and most of them live very far away. So, there are groups that are in Oklahoma or New Mexico. They're not here in Texas. Currently under modern times. The other groups that we work with are the Qualatecan groups, which are descendants of the Mission Indians from the Spanish missions, like in San Antonio and other areas nearby. And then we do also work with several indigenous groups in Mexico.
Thank you. Got another question here?
Hey, thank you. I was curious, you mentioned the importance of documenting and drawing out every aspect of figures and the pictographs themselves, including the wrist ornaments and things of that nature. I'm curious, do you guys take into account other aspects of the art, such as like how many dots come from the speech breath, if there's any consistency or pattern between those numbers and things of that nature?
Yeah, so we have our own sort of form, because when these sites are overwhelming, so you have to have some way of kind of documenting everything. And so we use our own internal rock art site form. But on that form, we have things like, especially when we're talking about individual figures, describing individual figures, we keep track of how many digits are on the right hand and how many digits are on the left hand, and all the things about, like, are the hands different colors or the feet different colors? Are they facing forward or in profile? What kind of brush strokes? Because they're using all kinds of paint application techniques. They're using stencils, they're using brushes, they're using fingers, they're using splatter paint. Especially with the speech breath, there's sometimes you can see like where they've just dabbed a brush to make the dots, and other times you can see where they've actually like flicked the paint to make sort of like Jackson Pollock splatter paint to do the speech breath. So we're documenting all of that and putting that into a database so that it's searchable, so that you can start to recognize patterns. The indigenous groups, actually, when Carolyn and Phil took these photographs and illustrations to Mexico, they actually started, they have names for these figures. They recognize who these figures are, and it's because of those attributes. Because of maybe the color of the mask or the headdress or stuff. And it's not just that they recognize that figure, they recognize that figure during what time of year or what kind of location. And so that's why all of those little details are important. So I don't know if that helped to answer some of your question.
Lots of variables to take into account. I see another question here. And we'll take one more.
Yeah, super quick. Thank you, first of all. What was the binder that they were using with the paint? Like, what kind of, is it animal fat or do you know?
I'd like to know more. The chemist in me wants to know more. We have not chemically identified what the material is. We know that there's a lot of organic material in the paint, and then when we analyze the unpainted rock, we see basically no organic material. So we know that there's organic material there, and with a lot of the new sort of techniques, chemical techniques that are out there, I'd really like to do more work on that. What we have done is experimental archaeology, where we looked at what resources were available for the people. The best paint is the animal fat. And we think deer bone marrow because of some chemistry data that we do have. Because we're in the desert, and so all the animals are super lean. Deer are the largest mammal. They're very lean. So the only place that you're really going to get a lot of fat is from the bone marrow. To break up that clumpy fat that's in the bone marrow, you need an emulsifier. And there's a plant, the yucca plant here is sometimes called the soap root plant, because when you take the root and you put it in water, it becomes spongy and it suds up because it has something called saponins in it that act like a soap, and they break up that fat and they turn it into basically an oil. So we're pretty sure that these are oil-based paints.
All right. And our final question for the night.
Yes, I was looking at one of your photographs of your figure. There's a rectangular figure, looks like a head with some antenna on it. Looks like it's outstretched hand, and there's something hanging from, looks like arms. What is hanging from the arms? Looks like it's outstretched, coming down like this. I don't know.
Yeah, so these figures are typically sort of rectangular or trapezoidal, forward facing most often with their arms out. And we do see all kinds of streamers and things hanging off of the arms in different positions. So sometimes we see it at the wrist location, sometimes we see it at the elbow location, sometimes we see it at the underarm area. We don't know. We just say that it's a wrist adornment. But if you, there are some ethnographic photographs of different indigenous groups across the Southwest where there would be different things that they would have on their wrist. But it was most likely some part of some ceremony, but I don't know exactly what it is.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, and yeah, I think we all enjoyed it here. Yeah. I'll let you all have a good night, and remember to tune back in on March 5th, 7 p.m. Dan Stuber will be understanding stone tools through replication and experiments. But thank you again. We really love the rock art, so thank you so much. Have a good night.
Bye.